All right, so I'm going to keep admitting people as they come in, but I think we should get started. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Devin George. I'm the outreach chair. Sorry, that's my real job. I'm the outreach chair for NEPA Audubon. I'm really excited that you all came to our Zoom webinar today. For those of you who haven't used Zoom, we are recording, just so everybody knows. And we're going to have everybody muted throughout the entire program. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. And if they're pertinent to a particular slide, I'll voice them to Kathy, or otherwise we'll wait until the end for questions. As I said, I put our website and our Facebook and Instagram links into the chat already. So if you want to look at any of those things, you can. But I'm just going to hand it over to Kathy and we're going to get started. All right, Kathy, take it away.
Okay, so welcome everybody and thank you for coming to the program. Every 4 years for the past few decades, Northeast PA Audubon has signed a treaty with the Lenni Lenape Nation, descendants of the first peoples in our area of Northeast Pennsylvania. I'd like to acknowledge that we'll be discussing how to manage land that first peoples freely roamed before colonization profoundly altered our landscape. So think of gardening for birds as remediation of the land rather than just creating a pretty yard. Because if you implement the things that I'm going to talk about here in the program, your yard may look wilder, more haphazard, and more natural than the ideals that you see promoted in magazines and on TV. You will notice that I will talk a lot about insects, because without insects, you will have no birds. Indeed, without insects, you won't have most of the food produced in the world. Not only should you garden for birds for the joy of it, but for playing a vital role in restoring a healthy ecosystem. This goes for your personal health and well-being as well, especially during these very difficult times that we're in. Studies are finding that people's mental and physical health are improved by connections with nature. They found that just looking out the window, or even looking at and hearing virtual natural scenes, provided benefits. So I hope that this virtual program will make you feel good enough to help us celebrate our 50th anniversary. So we are going to have 50 days of activities starting on June 4th. We'll have a local bird species featured each day, a piece of Audubon history, and a surprise activity. And yes, of course, we hope that those who can will donate a little bit of money to us to support our college and environmental camp scholarship fund. Now, here's an overview of what we'll talk about today. Why should you garden for birds? How to address the needs of a variety of species, how to assess and improve your own property, native versus non-native and invasive plants, good sources for plant choices. We'll talk a little bit about birdhouses. And yes, we have to deal with some threats to birds, and then we'll have our question and answer thing. So also, you don't need to take notes tonight. I am going to, or actually, Devin is going to make sure that you get a link to the notes that I made up with all the links that I'm going to talk about tonight. So you can just sit back and relax and let this flow over you. So why help birds? What good are they? I think it's safe to say that everyone likes to see and hear birds, but is there more? How do they help us? Well, they're insect eaters. 96% of birds need insects at some point during their time that they raise their families. One pair of chickadees may harvest about 5,000 caterpillars to raise one brood. Tree swallows scarf down flying insects, including mosquitoes, all day long. Birds eat and spread seeds. They help pollinate flowers. They're a good food source for other species. If we didn't have predators like owls and hawks, we would be overrun by rodents like voles, mice, rats, and rabbits. And if we didn't have carrion eaters like the turkey vulture up there in the upper left. Think of all the dead animals that would be lying around that aren't being taken care of. So now what do you and I need to survive? Well, we need food, we need water, and we need shelter or space. Other species need the same things. Let me get rid of these little pictures up here, sorry. Plant native species that provide nectar, seeds, and insect habitat, plants with overlapping blooming schedules and seed producing schedules. Again, 96% of bird species need insects to raise their young. Another way, of course, is to supplement birds' winter diet with seeds, suet, and fruit. The more diverse your plants and trees, the more diverse are going to be your insect, bird, and other animal populations. This also means more resilience to diseases, pests, and crop failures, unlike the vulnerabilities of monocultures. Even a flower box will provide habitat for spiders and insects and hummingbirds. Choices in plants can make a big difference. As explained in the excellent book written by Doug Tallamy called Bringing Nature Home, an oak tree can host 534 species of Lepidoptera, that's moths and butterflies, versus a beech tree that hosts only 126. Is feeding birds a good idea? Feeding birds in winter is nice and educational, but birds are smart about their diet. They take only about 40% of their nutrition from your feeder. The other 60% they search out in the wild. Now, this past winter, they might have taken a little more than 40% because we had a pretty tough snow cover this year. There are downsides to feeding birds. Concentrating birds in a small area can help transmit diseases and invite predators such as sharp-shinned hawks. Of course, they're birds too, and they need to eat. But you'll be doing the little birds a favor if you've kind of locate your feeders intelligently, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. It's important to clean feeders well and keep the seed dry to avoid mold. It's good to have multiple feeders with a variety of different seeds. You will draw a variety of different birds if you do that. Location of feeders is important. If you put them too close to shrubbery, a cat might or another predator might jump out and catch them. We think that about 10 feet away is a good distance from cover. But you don't want to put your feeders way out in the open, where again, predators from the sky can come down and snatch them as they're trying to get to the feeders. So it's good to create greenways for the birds, like little shrubs, small trees, that they can travel along safely to get to your feeders. All right, we've talked about food. Now we'll talk about water. My grandfather used to take an old garbage can lid and turn it upside down, put it on a stone wall, put a rock in it, and put water in it. And that was his bird bath. The one that I show on the left here is mine, and it's a little more sophisticated. It has a solar panel under the water. And when the sun shines on it, the water trickles in the bird bath. The birds are attracted by the sound of water. It's important to clean a bird bath every 3 days or so because it can get dirty, and also you don't want mosquitoes to be able to breed in it. You can get more complicated. You could make a garden pond. You can make a depression in the ground, get a pond liner, put rocks around the outside, have fun getting some water plants and putting them in there, some fish, some frogs. And it's nice to have a waterfall or a fountain in your pond, again, to keep the water moving so that mosquitoes don't breed in it. And also the sound of water attracts birds. Also, birds don't like to bathe in deep water because they'll get their bottoms wet, right? So this waterfall that's shown in this picture on the right provides a shallow place for the birds to bathe in. Okay, we did food, water, now space or shelter. A variety of natural living spaces will fit the needs of different species. And by the way, I want to say something about that hummingbird. That nest is about the size, a diameter of a quarter. Imagine raising your family in something like that. The hummingbird builds that nest out of perfectly natural materials, including lichens, and it holds it all together with old spider webs. And all that stuff is natural, right? So this bird is leaving no things to go to the landfill. It's totally uh, environmentally friendly, which is really cool. And think about how complicated we are. All the resources that we use to raise our own families. Now, a word about niches. These are the positions or roles taken by particular kinds of organisms within their community. Or, as I like to say, all God's creatures have a place in the choir. Some sing low and some sing higher. Potentially competing, I'm sorry, I skipped a little bit here. More than 90% of moth and butterfly caterpillars eat only particular groups of plants. These are called specialists. Some birds are generalists, such as the crows and the blue jays. They can eat a wide variety of foods. Some birds are specialists, such as the tree swallow that I mentioned before, that flies around catching flying insects. And it has a wide beak that it holds open and is able to catch insects more easily as it flies. Some other ones that I list here, the cardinal, the catbird, and the common yellowthroat. These are all birds that will nest in lower trees or shrubbery, often near your house. The scarlet tanager, on the other hand, is going to be a bird that will nest in the deeper woods, more in the tops of trees. You will not find it on your porch, as you will a robin, for instance, who might be nesting on the top of your porch light or in the wreath on your door. Or the phoebe, which likes to go into your woodshed or your garage and nest over your car and poop on it. There's a hint. Put a little hammock, an old t-shirt or an old rag underneath the nest that will catch the poop. And then you take that out later and put it in your garden after the birds have left the nest. The white-breasted nuthatch and the chickadee, these are cavity nesters. They will not be nesting in your shrubbery by your house. The bobolink, the field sparrow, the killdeer, and the meadowlark, these are all birds that need fields or meadows in which to nest. Potentially competing species have evolved traits and methods of partitioning resource use so that they share resources without overlapping too much. Partitioning can also happen within a species. For instance, one study showed that female downy woodpecker foraged on larger branches and the trunks of trees while the male foraged on the smaller branches so that they were not competing with each other. So how do we help create things for all these different niches? Well, varied layering and spacing of vegetation. This creates a diversity of habitat. You have tall trees and some of them are closer together, some of them are spaced more apart. You have medium-sized trees and then lower trees and shrubs out to meadow and then to your beautiful garden that you're going to have, or you already do maybe. So the edges between these different types of vegetations are called transition zones. These are very valuable. A feathered edge is more effective than a sharp edge. For instance, you don't want dense forest right up against lawn. You want to have it gradual. Pollinators also like clumps of flowers rather than a here and there planting of a particular species. Now, some birds breed in the deep woods and come out to the edges and open areas to forage later on, and some birds do the opposite. They breed in open areas and forage in deeper growth. Now, here's what would have happened if we'd been doing this live. So count your blessings, you don't have to do it. So these people have arranged themselves as tall trees, medium trees, shrubs, and the lady over on the right is a den tree, a dead or dying tree. She has her mouth open like a cavity and one arm sticking up like a dead branch. So that leads me to The next slide, den trees. Den trees are very important habitat, and they also are dead or dying, so they have a lot of insects in them. Ideally, if you're lucky enough to have large acreage, 7 per acre is a minimum. You can create a den tree by doing the double chainsaw girdle, which is shown in that middle picture there. And you take a chainsaw and run around it twice. The tree is going to die slowly, and it's going to drop its branches more safely than if the whole tree came down all at once. Brush piles, very easy to do. It's nice for birds who need to get out of harsh weather. It's also habitat for other creatures who like to live under the brush. It's also nice to have conifer branches on the top. I don't show that there, so that it gives more shelter in bad weather. Brush left on the ground also protects undergrowth and new emerging trees from deer browse. That's why you'll see loggers doing that after they do logging operations. They'll leave the brush sort of scattered around the woods to help those new trees emerge. Now you can add artificial shelters like birdhouses and insect shelters. The PA Game Commission has an excellent book called Woodworking for Wildlife. It's also online. You can go there and download the plans. Of course, you can buy bluebird houses. This picture in the middle is an insect shelter, which actually our son made for us as a Christmas present. It's very heavy, but with help, we got it up on the side of our house. You can buy these also commercially, or you can make your own. And I'm showing you a mason bee nest that we have hanging on our porch in the lower right. And I'm also including in your notes some information about mason bees and how you can make your own mason bee nest at home with materials that are readily available. And it's a great project for kids. Or you can make a butterfly or toad shelter. Take a broken flower pot, put a little mini pool out in front, bury it in among your flowers. Toad will go in there and we hope use it as a shelter. A butterfly shelter can be a can on its side. Butterflies like to get out of the wind. So is introducing human-made shelters a good idea, or is this unnatural? But don't we owe it to the other species to undo the unnatural things we've done to alter our landscape? I'm going to give you an example of why we might introduce human-made shelters. Back in the 1890s, there was a gentleman who thought it would be a great idea to bring all the birds that were mentioned in Shakespeare over to the New World. Well, included in that list were starlings. He brought 100 starlings over to the Brooklyn area, I think it was, and now they're all over the country. These were bully birds. They came in here as cavity nesters, and our little native bluebirds didn't know what hit them. They would be chased out of their cavities, and their population began to decline precipitously. People became alarmed, and they came up with the idea of making bluebird houses. And the trick with a bluebird house is that you have a 1.5-inch hole, and a starling can't fit in it, but a bluebird it's perfect for. So people saved the bluebirds from possible extinction by putting up these bluebird houses, and we're still doing it today. How to get started on your own property. Take a look at it. What kind of soils do you have? If you can't figure it out, you can go to the United States Department of Agriculture. They have soil survey things there. You can go to your extension office or your conservation district. They might help you with that. Look for your deep and shallow soils. Some plants can tolerate shallow, some need deep. Where is your shading in your full sun? Obviously, some plants like the sun, some like to have shade. What's your topography? Do you have slopes to deal with? What will grow best on slopes? Where are the wet areas and the dry areas? Again, some plants like dry, some plants like wet. Then you want to take an inventory. What do you already have? Check what's native, what is non-native. Do you have invasive species that need to be removed? Do you have good layering and spacing of vegetation, which we mentioned before? Do you have a wide variety of plants that bloom progressively throughout the season? Check your den tree population. Do you have a lot of lawn to mow? Did you know that we have, I shouldn't ask you questions because you can't answer. We have 63,248 square miles of lawn in this country as of 2016. As Virginia Scott Jenkins said in her 1994 book, The Lawn, A History of an American Obsession, American front lawns are a symbol of man's control of or superiority over his environment. Each hour of lawn mowing with a, I presume, a 2-cycle engine generates as much pollution as driving a car nearly 100 miles. Now, if you've got one of those push mowers that only works when you push it, that doesn't have an engine, I'll bet you'll have a small lawn. If you have one of those big shiny tractors you get on, you'll probably have a larger lawn. Lawns are not very useful habitat. You only find robins enjoying them. They are good for your lawn chair, your badminton, your croquet, and your child's swing set, but you don't need that much of it. Enhance what you already have. Now, all these things are in your notes, so I won't spend that much time here. So I'm just going to keep going. Here are some native and non-native, some native and non-invasive plant ideas. Again, these are on your notes. Most of these are deer resistant. I'm just giving you these slides so you know what I'm giving you in your notes. Okay, so I'm going to run through these pretty quickly. These are some large tree ideas. And one of the ones I like especially is the shagbark hickory, because under the bark you might find bats, beetles, butterflies, lots of things that can hide under there. The morning cloak butterfly, one of the earliest butterflies to come out in the spring, might use that as a hiding place. Remember, we talked about the oak being great for Lepidoptera. Eastern white pine. It's nice to have a mix of deciduous and coniferous trees. The coniferous trees give more shelter in the winter. Some shorter tree ideas. Sassafras, flowering dogwood. Serviceberry is great because it comes out early in the spring. You know, when you're driving down the road and you're looking into the woods and all the trees still look like winter except for this beautiful little tree throwing out its blossoms. Smooth alder, spice bush, which is the host plant for the spice bush swallowtail butterfly. The hazelnut will draw squirrels, but they are part of our environment too. Red osier dogwood, winterberry, silky dogwood. These shrubs, the viburnums, I don't think I'm showing all the species here. I'm showing just some of them. These are great for wildlife. They're deer resistant and they will grow in the understory of your woods in the shade. Red and black chokeberry, blueberry, pussy willow. I think the pussy willow is not native, but it's not invasive either. And it comes out very early. And it's valuable because it comes out that early. The pollinators will come and it'll provide a smorgasbord for early songbirds. Now some perennial ideas. Common and swamp milkweed and the butterfly weed. Again, the swamp milkweed is going to want to have its feet damp, the others not. Joe Pye weed will like dampness. The bee balm and the wild bergamot, these are related. The bee balm being the cultivar of the wild bergamot. I have these in my garden and I find them very easy to transplant. They have, a rhizome that spreads easily and it's not that deep, and you can just pick up a bunch of them and move them to another spot. The white snake root is nice because it likes shady areas. black-eyed Susan, the New England aster, and the goldenrod. Now, I put these two last flowers together for a reason. I hope that some of you have already read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall-Kimmerer, sorry. And if you haven't read it, it's a wonderful book to read. And there's a chapter in there about the New England aster and the goldenrod being together, and they bloom around the same time, and they're just beautiful together. And they found that pollinators come to them more readily if the two are together rather than in separate areas. The coneflower, the wild geranium, and the herbs. I have creeping thyme on my stone terrace. The bees love it, and I love it. I mean, we walk on it, it smells great. All the herbs, the deer won't eat, and we get to eat them, and the bees love them. Now, I stuck in some annual ideas here. There are plenty of more annuals than this, and I'm not an expert on these. I'm more of well, I shouldn't even say I'm an expert on anything, but I do know more about birds than I do know about flowers. But these are just some of the ones that stood out to me. Again, all this is in your notes. And the thing about annuals is that they bloom almost all season. And so they're a good bridge between when one perennial plant will stop blooming and another one starts blooming. So it gives more constant food. Now, if you're lucky enough to have an area that you can make into a meadow, for instance, remember that lawn that you want to get rid of? If you let it grow into meadow, it will be great habitat for birds like these, the field sparrow, the eastern bluebird, and the bobolink. It's important to mow only about a third of it each year, which leaves the rest for foraging over the winter. And don't mow that section between mid-April and mid-August to protect the grass nesting birds. Set your mower to the highest level. This will promote deep root growth. And when you mow, even mowing your lawn, you should mow into the center straight and then come to the outside, rather than start on the perimeter and move inward. Because if you do it from the outside in, you will trap a lot of insects in the middle and they don't know where to go. Now I'm going to play you the song of the bobolink because it sort of sounds like a music box gone wild, but I just think we need to share this. Okay. I hope you could all hear that. And when he sings that song, he shakes his whole body. He puts everything into that. Okay. Let's say that you let that lawn grow into a meadow and it looks kind of unmown. If the neighbors get angry about that you're not mowing that scruffy area, put up a sign or two and tell them that it's set aside as a natural area. And while your neighbor might be going by and notice that this area is getting pretty exciting. There will be insects flying all over the place, dragonflies, butterflies, bees. There will be the sound of buzzing. Birds will be moving in. Flowers will be blooming. And maybe, just maybe, your neighbor will get jealous and do the same thing in his or her yard. So consider yourself an educator if you do this. Now a little bit about invasive plants and the ecosystem disconnect. Insect populations are declining across the globe, which most scientists have attributed to climate change, pesticide use, habitat loss, and human development. Introduced ornamental plants and weeds also play a role in insect decline. Non-native plants tend to deter insects and thus deter birds. Some have become invasive. They spread and outcompete native plants, and they don't support our native insects and consequently our native animals and birds. They have not evolved together to create a natural balance. It takes long evolutionary time spans for insects and host plants to adapt to each other's chemical compounds and other features. And when exotics arrive, they bring few or none of the insects and pathogens that curb their growth in their native habitat, which makes it easier to outcompete the native species. Here are some common invasive plants in Pennsylvania. Now, I put these three species on the same slide for a reason. The multiflora rose, the autumn olive, and the Japanese barberry were all introduced by our local friendly conservation districts because they thought it would be a great idea. The multiflora rose they thought would make a wonderful fence to fence in all our lovely dairy cows. Well, it didn't stay as a fence, did it? It started to grow everywhere. And it's notoriously difficult to get rid of, and you don't want to walk through it because it has spines. Okay? So I'm sure that the conservation districts have some chagrin about what they did. Let's hope they're more careful in the future. Here's some more invasive plants. Again, I've put all these in the notes. Purple loosestrife is a wetland species, and I'm not sure if the nurseries in Pennsylvania are still selling this. I hope they're not, but don't buy any, okay? Garlic mustard, it's all over the place. Yes, you can make garlic pesto out of it, but I don't think you can make enough that we'll use it all up. So please pull it out whenever you can. Japanese knotweed you can also eat when it's a sprout, but I don't know if we're going to be able to keep up with that. In other words, to eat enough to get rid of it. Here's some more invasive plants. I know I have Japanese honeysuckle on my property. I'm trying to get rid of it. Okay, now, invasive insects. They can create havoc as well. The ash borer is killing our beautiful ash trees, altering our forest landscape. The lanternfly, the spotted lanternfly, is killing an immense number of trees, especially fruit and nut trees and grapevines. As these insects are foreign, birds either do not recognize them as food, or if they do try them, find them distasteful and spit them out. But you will see signs of woodpecker activity on the ash trees affected by the ash borers. If you see this blonde look on the side of your ash trees, that's from the woodpeckers eating the larva of the emerald ash borer. Also, the red wings on the lanternfly, this is a warning signal to birds. You know about the monarch butterfly caterpillar that eats the milkweed, which has poisonous stuff in it. So when the monarch becomes a butterfly, it is that bright orange. The birds have learned to stay away from that. That's why the viceroy butterfly mimics the monarch, because then the birds think that that's also poisonous, which it isn't, but we won't tell the birds that. Okay, so the lanternfly feeds on the tree of heaven, which also has toxicity in it. All right, some threats to birds. I'm afraid we have to talk about this. Along with invasives, cats are a big threat to birds. A famous 2013 study found that 1.3 to 3.7 billion birds are killed each year in the United States by cats. So we are pleading with you that if you have a cat, keep it as an indoor cat. It will live longer, it will have less parasites, it won't bring in ticks, it will have less fleas, if any. It will live longer. We've already mentioned the decline of insect populations. Bird numbers have dropped by a third since 1970, and those who rely on insects are showing the worst decline in population. Let's see, habitat loss. Oh, well, let me go back to insect populations. Remember what you're doing in your garden. You are creating habitat for insects as well as birds, because the birds won't exist if you don't have the insects. All right, so now habitat loss. I've already talked about the lawns and the huge acreage we have, so please cut back on them. And fragmentation and genetic islands come from our carving up of the landscape. We create suburban areas where we've put a lot of houses. We have parking lots, we have malls, we have highways. Ever wonder why there are so many dead animals along the road? They're trying to get from one part of their habitat to another, and they didn't quite make it. And genetic islands means that you're isolating species from other members of their species so that their genetic pool is not as healthy. That's one of the ways that you can help is to create a great habitat around your yard, and we hope that your neighbors will do it too, so that you will be connecting these good habitats. And then there's climate change. It has brought a disruption of weather and climate patterns, and if you cannot adapt fast enough, it will be your undoing, which brings me to phenology, phenological disruption. Phenology is the study of the seasonal cycles of plant and animal life that have evolved over millennia. And I'm going to give you an example. Let's say we have a early warm spring. The leaves on the trees come out according to the length of day. The insects generally come out according to temperature. So it's warm spring, the insects are going to emerge early. They're not going to find the leaves that they need to eat. Let's say these insects are caterpillars, okay? So the caterpillar population is going to be stressed. It's going to decline because there's not enough food. The birds, who have been programmed over millennia to arrive when the insects are at their height, are finding a dearth of insects. So the birds are put under stress and they can't raise their families as usual. And of course, the opposite can be true. You can get an early wet or a late wet, cold spring, and it'll throw the whole thing off the other way. Things that you can do to combat climate change. You can practice carbon positive landscaping. And I have a link in your notes to a Sierra Club magazine, the most recent one that discusses carbon positive landscaping. And a few of the highlights are: use a rake or a broom instead of a leaf blower. Why? Because you're not using fossil fuel energy or electricity that's made by fossil fuels. And you can use a broom or a rake, right? Avoid concrete whenever possible. It has a huge carbon footprint in the manufacture of concrete. Avoid chemical fertilizers. Most fertilizers contain synthetic nitrogen, which requires a lot of energy to produce. Once the fertilizer is applied, the sudden large burst of nitrogen feeds the plants, but also stimulates soil microbes to produce extra amounts of nitrous oxide, a potent greenhouse gas. Now, Audubon, National Audubon, has done 2 studies recently, 2014 and 2019. The most recent is called Survival by Degrees. This is the link. It's in your notes as well. You can go to that site and you could put in your zip code, and it will give you local information about impacts of climate change on birds. And then there are pesticides and herbicides as threats to birds. If you poison a mouse, it goes up the food chain to an owl. You poison the weeds, you poison the insects which the birds rely upon. You poison the insect pests, you also poison beneficial insects as well. Let me be blunt. If you use pesticides and herbicides, you cannot safely garden for birds, nor can you garden safely for yourself and your family. If you are purchasing plants, systemic pesticides are easily water soluble and can migrate from the plant to surrounding areas, including waterways. They also have serious impact upon soil organisms. If you're purchasing plants, ask the seller if the plant has systemic pesticides in it. If it was grown from pesticide-infused seed, The poison will be in the plant's system and will harm insects and birds. If the seller cannot tell you, tell that person why you cannot buy the plant. The retailer most likely will not be able to answer your questions about systemic pesticides because that information will not be divulged on the label. Go elsewhere. Buy organically grown plants whenever possible. And just think, as you might be helping educate your neighbor about the value of unmowed spaces, you might use the power of the purse to influence plant growers, wholesalers, and retailers. Okay, here's a review of what we've talked about. Biodiversity is important for a healthy yard and garden that supports bird populations. Encourage biodiversity by creating habitat in your yard. Assess and take inventory of your property. Keep what works, get rid of what is not good, like invasives and too much lawn. Provide native plantings to enhance the habitat. Remember to provide food, water, shelter, or space for a variety of species. Remember our spacing and layering, the heights of things and the spacing out of plantings. The overlapping bloom time and seed production of your plants. Avoid herbicides and pesticides for everyone's protection. And please keep your cat or cats indoors. Many have found solace in nature during this kind of quarantine and tension. So I hope you found solace in this presentation and you'll put it to use gardening for birds, insects, and a healthy future. This time of quarantine provides a great opportunity to spend time gardening. And if you have children in your household, involve them in this important, therapeutic, health-giving, and educational activity. And one last thing, I included a link to PA Audubon's bird-friendly communities. I found that just recently to put into your notes. So thank you for sticking with me. I hope you did. Happy gardening. And to help us continue our scholarship program, you may donate to seeds at nipoaudubon.org. And remember to watch for our 50th anniversary celebration. And there's one more thing that I included. I forgot to mention this in your notes. It's a link to National Audubon's bird-friendly plants. So please go to that. It's a great resource. So now I'm open to questions and comments.
All right. Well, first, I just want to thank you, Kathy. That was wonderful. I want to let everyone know that I dropped the link to the handouts in the chat, and I'm also going to be sending that out in an email to everybody, so you'll have it after today's program. We had a question earlier in the program from Mike, and he asked, where can you get the signs for a protection area? So you had a picture of a sign like for your lawn.
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. You can create your own. I know I got some signs that said no spray and put them up around the edges of my property so that the trucks wouldn't come along and spray the stuff along the side of the road. I think maybe you could go online and look to see if there are signs. Another idea might be if you sign up for bird-friendly communities, the PA Audubon's bird-friendly communities, they might have signs.
Stephanie Uranowski says that National Wildlife Federation also has signs.
Oh, thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah, you're welcome. You have to check off some boxes with it. So it's a bird and pollinator friendly environment for your yard, but it's basically if you provide shelter, food, water sources, and the like, if you check all the boxes, then you get to sign up, and it's anywhere from a certificate to a metal sign that you can put in the front of the yard. We're going to install ours this year.
Great.
Emily asks, did you list the books that you mentioned in your presentation in the notes?
Yes, except I didn't list the braiding sweetgrass. So you'll have to write that down yourself.
And then Shannon also says that Audubon Society has a form you can fill out online and a donation to get a sign. And she has a link for everybody in the chat. Thank you so much. All right, any other questions?
Thank you, Kathy. That was awesome.
I don't know who said that. Who said that?
Subalu.
Sue Ballou.
Yeah.
Oh, Sue, I just have to tell everybody, Sue Ballou is one of my friends who lives in Colorado. And yeah, I've known her since we were little babies. So glad you could make it.
It was a great talk. And
Thank you.
While you were talking, a flock of 20 robins landed in the tree in front of our house. So apparently, because we had a huge storm, they're blown in on the storm.
Oh,
Or-
that's right.
I don't
You've
know.
had bad weather out there, haven't you?
Yep.
Yeah. Great to hear from you.
Say it again.
We have another question from the chat. Carl asks, we bought a couple of bluebird houses. We know they should face east. What else should we know about when and where to put them?
Okay. This is the right time of year to put them up. Bluebirds are early nesters. They start looking at the bluebird boxes in early March. You're going to want to have them in an open area, like a field or a meadow, but pretty close to some shrubbery so that when the baby robins leave the nest box, they will be able to fly to cover. Let's see. Yeah, you can face east. I mean, you can go a little southeast or a little northeast. It's not a deal breaker. You should put them about let's see, at least 5 feet high, I think. There, you can go to the Bluebird Society, National Bluebird Society, and they have lots of information about bluebirds on there. If I didn't tell you enough.
All right, and Phyllis Twilliger asks, hi Phyllis, are bat houses helpful?
Absolutely. Bats are an important part of the ecosystem. You know, I talked about the tree swallows eating mosquitoes during the day. Well, tree swallows go to bed at night and the bats come out and eat them at night. Of course, the bats have suffered the white nose syndrome, so that there has been a kind of a collapse of the bat population. Bat houses generally are for the female bats who are raising their young, and they will go in there as a colony and live in the bat box. So it's great to put a bat box up.
And then I see in the chat as well, Emily says that you can purchase cute yard signs that say, don't mind the weeds, we're feeding the bees. I like that. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Someone else says that they love your hat, and I think we should all acknowledge how fabulous Kathy's hat is.
Oh, it's actually a craft that we do with the kids. We call it a bird crown, and it's got, maybe I should stop sharing my screen here. Yeah, okay. It shows all different kinds of birds on it, and the kids can put it together with pipe cleaners and these birds that we provide, and it says birds help make our earth healthy and beautiful. So I just like to do that when I give this program.
All right, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Anybody else? All right, I think you're all good.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Hi, Whitney.
Hey, hi, Kathy. That was great.
Thank you. Yeah, Whitney is an insect. He's an oh dear.
Entomologist.
Thank you, entomologist. Yes. So I hope I got things right.
You nailed it.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.